Good afternoon. I'm United States Attorney Zachary Cunha. Thank you for joining us. Earlier today, 2 Rhode Island men were taken into federal custody for their alleged leadership roles in an organized retail theft ring, following the seizure last week here in Rhode Island of over 60,000 stolen items worth an estimated $1.6 million. We have also seized, pursuant to court order, multiple packages in transit and 2 bank accounts. Both individuals have now been charged by this office and have appearances today before a federal magistrate judge to answer the charges against them. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce my law enforcement colleagues, Ketty Larko Ward, Inspector in charge of the Boston Division for the United States Postal Inspection Service, and Michael J. Kroll, Special Agent in charge of Homeland Security Investigations for New England. You'll be hearing from both of them shortly. I'd also like to introduce Colonel Bradford Connor, Chief of the Warwick, Rhode Island Police Department. Chief Connor's department was instrumental in this investigation. And I'd also like to commend Assistant U.S. Attorney Lee Chin, who is leading this prosecution, and to thank Criminal Investigator Corey McManus of the Postal Inspection Service, Special Agent Rachel Robinson of Homeland Security Investigations, and Detective Matthew Smith of the Warwick Police Department, all of whose investigative work was integral to this case. Organized retail crime is a topic that is familiar to many of us from the news. Instances of organized shoplifting, retail stores with goods locked behind plexiglass, retail workers menaced by individuals or groups as shoplifters make off with items from drugstores or groceries or big box retailers. Today's charges are leveled against 2 high-level players in one of the types of criminal organizations that drives this kind of retail theft. Norman L. Cipriano, age 52, of Warwick, Rhode Island, who has today been detained in federal custody, and Patrick M. Vigno, age 59, of Cranston. They are charged with, among other offenses, interstate transportation of stolen goods, conspiracy to commit interstate transportation of stolen goods, and money laundering. We allege that these 2 men served as what are known as diverters in an organized retail crime ring that netted an estimated $12.3 million in revenue over the past 3 years by targeting, stealing, and then reselling high-end goods, primarily cosmetics, over-the-counter medications and supplements, and other compact high-value items. To give you some context for what that means, if you take a look at this chart illustrates the common structure of organized retail crime organizations like the one we're talking about today. At the lowest level, individuals known as boosters, or groups of individuals known as boosters, are recruited to engage in the actual retail theft, shoplifting the items that are ultimately passed on to the organization. These are the folks who are actually stealing things from store shelves. And in an organization like this, those thefts aren't random. The boosters will target specific items at the direction of a crew boss who tells them what to steal and pays them for their work, often in cash or cryptocurrency. Above the crew boss sit an array of players who serve as middlemen and logistics coordinators, fencers who typically own warehouses or front companies, and cleaners who are employed to make sure that the goods are stripped of any indication that they're stolen. And above them, as we approach the top of the hierarchy, sit the diverters, individuals such as we allege the 2 defendants charged today. Diverters typically serve as large-scale distributors and wholesalers. They will often set up shell companies to both conceal their own roles and to launder illicit proceeds. They will in turn serve as suppliers to small and mid-sized retailers who are often unwitting purchasers of these stolen goods. And to a lesser extent, in some instances, they will sell the goods themselves to end consumers via online marketplaces. It is our allegation that Cipriano and Vigno both served in the role of diverters. Based on an extensive 3-year investigation into this ring, federal agents last week executed multiple search warrants at locations in Pawtucket, Warwick, and Cranston, Rhode Island. Those warrants uncovered vast quantities of stolen goods. Again, primarily cosmetics and over-the-counter drugs, as you can see here in this photograph from the Warwick location, and likewise in Cranston. To give you some further sense of the level of organization that was involved, you can see at one Pawtucket location, searched by federal officers, what looks like a warehouse storeroom with all manner of stolen goods, organized, stacked, and ready for resale. The same was true, to an even greater degree, at a second warehouse location located at another Pawtucket address, also searched last week. And while those pictures give you some sense of the scale of this enterprise, as I referenced, federal agents seized roughly 60,000 items worth roughly $1.6 million that were on hand just at the time these warrants were executed. But in physical terms, that's enough stolen goods that it required 3 24-foot box trucks, like the one partially visible in this photograph, all of which were eventually filled to capacity to transport the stolen goods from these locations. I want to emphasize two things. One, this investigation remains ongoing, and we anticipate further charges yet to come against other players. And second, for members of the public who may be asking, what impact does this have on me? Let me say this. First and foremost, the clearest, most obvious, and most devastating impact of these kinds of criminal organizations is that they put our friends, neighbors, and family members who work in retail at risk from the violence that can occur if a thief is confronted. They degrade the quality of life in our communities as goods in stores are locked away for safety, and most significantly, they impose a heavy economic price as the costs of theft-driven losses get passed along to all of us at the cash register. With that, I know that the inspector in charge and the special agent in charge have some thoughts they'd like to share with you, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Good afternoon. When people think of thefts from merchants, they often think of shoplifting, a benign term that fails to capture the true impact of organized retail crime. As illustrated in this case, this was a large-scale operation resulting in millions of dollars in losses to retailers and a much broader and more severe impact on our communities. Organized retail theft rings often place retail employers and customers at risk when stores are swarmed by thieves. But then another real risk to consumers when these stolen products are sold. The use of the U.S. mail to facilitate these crimes is not just about moving the items from conspirators to unknowing buyers, but an attempt to add a level of legitimacy to these transactions to disguise the true illegal nature of these items. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service is proud to stand with our partners, both law enforcement and private sector, here today and is grateful for the leadership and the commitment from the Rhode Island U.S. Attorney's Office in combating organized retail crime.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Kroll. I'm the Special Agent in charge of Homeland Security Investigations here in New England. Let me begin by thanking U.S. Attorney Cuna and his office, Postal Inspector in charge Larco, Colonel Connor of the Warwick Police Department. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank our private sector partners who are critical to our success. Through enhanced public and private sector partnerships, and with one of the most expansive investigative mandates in the federal government, HSI has become a national leader in disrupting and dismantling polycriminal networks involved in a myriad of illicit activity, to include organized theft groups involved in retail crime, cargo theft, and other systemic thefts. Contrary to popular belief, organized retail theft is not a victimless crime. It accounts for billions of dollars of loss to our economy, and this network alone robbed legitimate retailers of well over $1.6 million in merchandise. Their actions have wide-ranging economic impacts. Loss of private sector revenue and jobs that our communities rely so heavily upon. Their actions contribute to increased cost of goods and services, which industry will no doubt have to ultimately pass on to you and I. Their actions weaken consumer confidence and raise quality assurance concerns, especially for those who purchase goods sold through third-party platforms. Most importantly, their actions represent a complete and utter disregard for the rule of law, and for that, they will be held accountable. I have to say, this is not a victory lap, but a call to action. Consumers beware, do your due diligence, buy from reputable sellers, and if the price appears too good to be true, it probably is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Sure. I have a question about how actually this investigation began. You say that Warwick was very involved with this investigation. I imagine it must be some of the big box stores. If the chief or you could talk about how this all started.
Well, as I say, it's an ongoing investigation, so there's a limit to how much detail I can get into. One, I want to make clear that the thefts that we're looking at involve basically all levels of retail. So whether it's end retailers, big box, or otherwise, and we're talking about both in Rhode Island and across the nation, ultimately being funneled here. As far as how the investigation began, it actually was initiated by some investigative work by the Postal Inspection Service, which became aware of some of these activities, and it kicked off from there with all of the investigative partners that you've heard from today.
Could these cosmetics and stolen goods, could these hurt somebody?
That's an excellent question. I want to be very clear that we are not making any specific allegations of end user harm, but when you're talking about products that are meant for cosmetic use, or you're talking about over-the-counter drugs, whether they're allergy drugs or cold medications or otherwise, a lot of those products are meant to be handled and stored in a particular way, whether it's temperature or humidity or otherwise. And when you take them out of the ordinary stream of commerce, you can't guarantee that that is in fact the case. And that's one of the reasons why, as the special agent in charge put it, people ought to be cautious and careful and exercise due diligence about where they get products from.
Do either or both of these suspects have any contacts with law enforcement before? And if
Yes,
so,
they
what
do.
kind?
So both individuals have had prior contact with law enforcement. Mr. Cipriano was convicted in 2005 on Rhode Island state charges involving the conspiracy to receive stolen goods. He was sentenced to 10 years with 6 to serve. And that case, to the best of my understanding, involved both receipt of goods from boosters and internet sale of goods. In 2014, he was convicted on federal charges of trafficking in counterfeit goods, for which he served 50 months in prison with 3 years of supervised release. That case involved the sale of over 5,000 counterfeit sports jerseys, as well as perfume, makeup, and other over-the-counter products. Mr. Vigneault has a 1997 federal conviction for drug conspiracy and money laundering. He served 23 years and ultimately released in 2020.
You talk about the risk for these retail workers. Were there any things you heard of after the fact when the investigation started where they talked about maybe getting hurt? What does that mean at risk? Are they threatening them, putting guns to their face, saying, give me what your goods, things like that? Can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. I wasn't referring to specific allegations of what I'll call highway robbery, hand over the goods or we'll shoot you.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the scenario where whenever you have individuals or particularly groups of shoplifters who are targeting retailers and a conscientious employee decides to step in and try to stop them, there's a risk that violence ensues. That's what I was referring to.
Thank you.
Can you talk more about how these were being sold? Were they being sold on the internet? Any specific website? Were any of them going out of the country?
We don't have any allegations that they were going out of the country. They were being sold, these particular diverters, our allegation is that they were selling to small and mid-sized brick and mortar retailers who were not aware of the origin of the goods, thinking that they're a legitimate wholesaler. So that was the primary conduit for the sale of these goods. We did also see instances in which some e-commerce platforms that host individual sellers or allow individual sellers to market through their platforms, some of the goods were going that way, which again, I think speaks to the special agent in charge's point that sometimes when you're on one of these websites and you see a product at a price that is markedly lower than anywhere else that it's being offered, you ought to ask yourself whether there's a reason for that.
And these cosmetics, are they coming from like Sephora? Where are they coming from? What specific stores would be selling these?
Well, again, it's a wide array, so this could be corner drugstores, this could be other higher-end retailers. I'm not going to suggest that, for example, home improvement stores are selling cosmetics, but there are plenty of big box retailers that do sell some of those.
They're coming
types of
from
products.
retailers.
They are coming. The initial point of origin for most of these goods is shoplifting at retailers. They are then diverted into this secondary market.
So these are just diverters, and so obviously you're looking at the orchestrator. Can we expect any announcement of any arrests or anything else coming up imminently?
2 points. One, we are looking at individuals at all levels of this hierarchy. And two, although this is a good general overview of how these organizations often work, in some instances, the diverters actually are at the top of the pyramid. In other instances, they are working with individuals who rely on them for money laundering or to fund other criminal enterprises. But as I say, we're looking at individuals at all levels of the hierarchy.
So right now, we don't know who the orchestrator is. That's information that's not being released.
All I'm telling you is the investigation continues.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question. Do you have a quick sec to talk about what you know about the cockfighting?
It's not our case, and that case was